Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It is 3:32 p.m. here in Brussels, and on behalf of the ICR Facility, welcome to this session on reforming the investment climate to respond to the COVID-19 crisis in African, Caribbean, and Pacific states. We have numerous attendants today. We have participants from different latitudes, as I can see, participants from Zambia, from Kenya, Uganda, Jamaica, Mauritius, and several other countries. So thank you all for joining us. It's a big pleasure. I am Diego Borrero from the ICR Facility, and today I am joined by Dr. Cesar Cordova, who is a leading expert in this field and has advised more than 40 countries on how to tackle these reforms, how to design them, how to implement them, and how to make them sustainable for economic growth. A few words about the ICR Facility. We are an initiative supporting the improvement of the investment climate in ACP countries, African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries, and we support them through technical assistance. Indeed, the ICR Facility is co-funded by the European Union, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States under the 11th European Development Fund, together with the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, and the British Council. And ICR is implemented by 4 agencies: GIZ, British Council, Expertise France, and SNV. So what do? We, as I said, we support ACP countries with targeted, on-demand technical assistance in the field of business environment reform and the broader investment climate. We operate in 3 areas. The first one is business environment reform itself. It's about supporting reforms along the different functional areas of business environment, functional areas such as business registration, licensing, investment policy, and others. We support these reforms either at an economy-wide level or at an industry or value chain level. Then second, we support business environment sustainability, which is a key concept for us. And here we're talking about both social and environmental sustainability. For example, how to make more inclusive the business environment, how to make it more gender sensitive, more pro-poor, more pro-youth, as well as how to enable this business environment to tackle big challenges such as climate change. And third, we support PPD, public-private dialogue, which we believe is a key instrument to design, implement, and inform these reform processes. So this webinar is part of ICR's response to the current COVID crisis. And actually, the attendance of this webinar can apply for a more targeted, more personalized one-on-one session after this webinar, a bilateral session between your organization and the expert to dig further into your specific case, your specific challenges, and get a more targeted assistance. So stay tuned until the end of this presentation, where we're going to explain how these one-on-ones could work and how you could apply for this. Finally, just some technical specifications. Feel free to write your questions in the questions box that you have on your screen right now, and we will do our best to respond them all throughout the session and the Q&A part of it. Also, some technical specifications. We are recording this session so that you can actually can revisit it after the session, or you can actually share it with some of your colleagues who could not make it this time. So thank you for this, and Cesar, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Diego, very much. Good morning for some, good afternoon for many. I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you about this evolving issue, very interesting, very new, very challenging issue of what can we do about this event. But first of all, let me thank you, the ICR and its donors, for this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts, some of my experience. The time is counted. I will try to go across a very, very large topic. So the first part I will rush, but of course we can maybe discuss this further either through question and answer or through other means later after this webinar. So the presentation will be everything we do before a pandemic will seem alarmist, and everything we do after pandemic will seem inadequate. Yes, pandemic is really once in a lifetime, maybe sometimes 2 lifetimes, sometimes even 3 lifetimes. So it is difficult basically to react, to prepare, to manage a pandemic. Anyway, we need to. It is an obligation to try to be as coherent, to be as efficient, as effective, as transparent possible in front of this. So this is what we will try to do through 3 parts. The first one is just to put a context of where we are, why this pandemic is hurting so much and will hurt so much the business environment. The second part is what are the main options, policy options that we have before and basically during and after, and mostly after the sanitary crisis passes. Part 3 and part 4 will be more action-oriented, what you can do in terms of managing each one of these processes. And again, I must repeat, mostly after the sanitary crisis is going, but the sanitary crisis and the afterwards are related. So without waiting for much, as you probably know, and as everybody knows, as the world has realizing and is realizing every day even more, COVID will hit very badly the economy, the business environment. People talk about the second Great Depression, similar to the one that hit mostly developed countries 90 years ago. And it will be terrible for many people, for many businesses, for basically many countries too. Some of the figures are there. World Bank, IMF have already started to elaborate projections. Some are even more negative. Some are different. What I want to show you here is that some countries will be better than others, including those that could have been the same. So again, there is a difference between the countries, and it is a little bit what we will try to explore today. But anyway, it was hard to predict, but now we need to act. There will be major alterations. There will be structural alterations. Some sectors will change, some might disappear, some will become more automatic, others will grow. For instance, e-commerce probably will be a winner. On the other hand, maybe restaurants or bars might not. Tourism will be hit. There will be changes in the structure of each one of our countries. Second, the government debt will grow. There's very little way that the government cannot pass more debt and try to do something in front of this catastrophe, in front of all this unemployment that will rise, all this bankruptcy that will happen. So that will mostly happen in most of the countries. The third important thing that we haven't seen it yet, but it will become important maybe in medium term, there will be monetary turbulences. There will be devaluation, revaluations. Hopefully, this will be avoidable as it could not be during the first depression. But this will be an impact. It will be an impact for doing business everywhere. Of course, key elements of the ACP economies will be hit. It will be trade, it will be travel, it will be tourism, that we know. It will be also probably domestic services. Migrant remittances will be important too. Many countries will suffer, maybe some more than others, but it will be, certainly it is already an impact, and it might become bigger. Of course, it will also change the primary export of minerals, or maybe even oil. Some of the oil countries now are facing a big change. But also in terms of FDI, there will be some countries, developed countries, who will try to fight for repatriating some of the jobs, repatriating some of the value chains of some products they consider essential. All this will definitely have impact on the rules of the game internationally, but mostly locally and nationally. And this is going to be the key topic now. Of course, all this will happen in different ways, in different size. It will hit inequality. It will be in different ways and in unequal ways, sectors, people, regions, cities. And of course, it will depend about the vaccine and how fast it is distributed. So let's see how this evolves, but you can already consider that the next few months and maybe more will be a different world. Where we are, I'm not going to give you a course of pandemics. I think everybody now is well attuned and a specialist on flattening the curve. You know that it's geometric. The viruses, the more people have the viruses, the faster it goes. So the whole idea is to break this geometry, and you need to flatten the curve. You cannot do actions before it is flattened. Why it is importantly you cannot? Because at the end of the day, as long as there is a sanitary crisis, there is a consumer confidence crisis. Consumers will not buy, will not move, will not eat as well as they did before. And of course, this flattening of the curve becomes essential, and it is really what we will be talking about during the crisis, the sanitary crisis. So basically, my presentation, you will see some of the slides will talk mostly about in the middle of the sanitary crisis. After the flattening, that means basically recovering from the sanitary crisis and the lockdown in particular, and in the long term, because there are also some actions. And long term is not only for waiting for the new wave, but also to the new world, to the new mechanism, the new rules that will be set up after this big depression. Countries in the middle of the crisis, that means in the middle of the sanitary crisis, need to be fast and agile. This is one of the big lessons. The fact is that developing countries will be hard hit, and we will talk a little bit more. What is important in this case, in particular for the business environment, for the business climate, is that we need to safeguard the rules of law. So far there has been little chaos and mayhem and related to crisis. There has been already. There has been in Serbia. There has been some in Kazakhstan. People who don't tolerate any more lockdowns, or people who just cannot wait for waiting for the crisis. But again, let's try to assume that we keep the economy under the rule of law, where collectively we can save ourselves. Again, this is going to be important, and you will see why a rational and transparent attitude from the government is so essential, because it's fundamental for keeping and safeguarding the rule of law. Another thing that we are learning clearly is that a lot is done at subnational governments, at subnational level, either regions, either states, either cities, either sometimes neighborhoods. The crisis will hit very locally. It will basically impose more harm when the sanitary situation locally are more distressed. And as well, the economic tissue will be harder hit at local level than at national. This doesn't mean that national nothing is done. But certainly, for instance, at the beginning, there will be very little recourse for international rules or for national. We will be seeing a lot can be done more at national, sometimes at regional, like Southeast Africa or West Africa, etc. But again, the pandemic will be much more localized, and we'll come back to that. What does that mean? Another very important thing is that any reaction will need to be based in facts and evidence and on expertise. I think in that sense that the COVID pandemic has been very bad for many demagogues who had easy solutions or who thought about easy solutions. It's not. And so the better you can bring facts, expertise, the more you can build trust, and the more you can safeguard the rule of law and the community response to that crisis. As well, again, something that in the middle of the crisis, but afterwards as well, you need the clearly channels of information. It's misinformation that will break the rule of law. It's misinformation that will make any solutions you have abused or not followed. Again, it's something a very precious instrument the governments have during the crisis as well as afterwards. Without trust, there will be no compliance. Without trust, it will be very hard to return to normal. You can, if you don't care, you can go from a sanitary crisis to an economic crisis to a political crisis. It can go very fast. So again, rule of law, transparency, ensuring that the actions are at the level you need are essential to keep that trust in the national. Of course, you have seen that many countries have already acted, even during the crisis. Here are some of the typical examples of initiatives OECD-rich countries have done. You will see that some relate a lot to control employment, labor, the first column. You will also see that there has been a lot in terms of tax and debt. Very important too, as well, in terms of giving and aids, subsidies or grants and loans and lending also has been very big. It is harder to see, but there has been already some structured policy, even in the middle of the crisis, concerning new markets, restructuring some businesses, for instance, some industries to work on masks or producing hydrochloric solutions, privileging teleworking, things like that can be. And of course, there will be, and in red, it's in red because it's very important for us tonight, this afternoon, it's the regulatory relief. We will be talking a little bit more about that. So after the crisis, what will happen? The result will be precarious. For instance, data from China shows clearly that even months after lockout is finished, the tissue of SMEs have been hardly hit. There are really some were not able to go back to work, to come back to business People really not even move back to their places of work. So it is hard, especially for SMEs. It will be hard. On the other hand, you will see, and from the ACP perspective, it will be important that rich countries have already put a lot of money. A lot of money means really 10 trillions. And this figure, I think, I picked it up 2 weeks ago. And yesterday, the French president announced a new 100 billion of euros for the French industry. So you will see a lot of money, 3 times what the response was for the 2008-2009 crisis, 30 times the money that was put around the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. This is going to have an impact. It's good on one hand, definitely, because if rich countries grow, probably it will mean more tourists, more growth, more trade, more development, more aid for ACPs. So it's not something bad. Definitely it's not. And I think it's affordable and it's needed. As well, we already know that World Bank, IMF, the European Union, some of the donors are very concerned, and they are really start to adjust and even open up new international funds for countries like yours. And this is also very good, and it will be important to use those very wisely. But whatever this, and despite of this, there will be a crisis. But if we say a crisis, we need to understand it's also an opportunity. Machiavelli, 400, 500 years ago, wrote it that the worst situation presents the best occasions. This is how the good politicians, there was a US politician who say it's terrible to waste a crisis, to not do something. Crisis is a way to unblock blockages, to move, to think differently, the beneficial crisis is to learn what didn't work and what we can make work better, to basically look for new approaches. And so again, the crisis will be tough, but I think we have only one way, is to look at it as an opportunity to do better, to improve the business environment, and to adjust. What can we do? What ACP can do in terms of improving the business environment? Well, usually when you are a government, you have a series of policy options, policy tools, policy instruments called. You often have taxes where you can increase and decrease and make changes. You have the budget where you can spend on programs, on loans, on grants. Basically, you can see this tax policy and this budgetary policy. It's what the OECD has done a couple of slides before. Governments can also change the behavior of businesses and of consumers or citizens through information and communication. Very important tool. They can educate, they can make information campaigns, and they can really do. And then there's another policy, very important, and regulatory policies. Usually governments use them all. By the way, I didn't put a fifth policy instrument here, which is basically the use of force. Governments have a monopoly on the use of force, usually the police or the army. If things go well, they won't need it. You can manage a crisis with this array, with this mix of policy instruments. However, what tells you, what you see from the ACP perspective, is that 2 of them will be very, very limited this time. The fiscal crisis, that means the tax and budget, will encourage regulatory reform. For ACP countries, for African countries, Caribbean countries, Pacific countries, there will be not a lot of places to move your tax policy, either to raise taxes or to lower taxes. As well, you won't have a lot of money to do programs, to make a big mega infrastructure initiative like Europe for the green environment. You will not have a lot of money to loan to small firms or to give money entrepreneurs. You will have some money for information and communication, but here again, you will be blocked because usually it's hard to have a single voice. So what ACP countries have left? Basically a regulatory policy. Regulatory policy might be perhaps the only way. And to be honest, even if you wanted to run your debt up, it's most probably that you will be blocked. I remember some reading from 2-3 weeks ago from the Ministry of Finance from Ghana, saying that it is quite unfair that the rich country governments were actually doing in terms of tax and spending what they have been forbidding to most of the third world for many, many years. Well, now they are spending and taxing without limit. Unfortunately, they will not be as forgiving. So you will be blocked. So again, the idea is to use what you can, and your main tool, and I think this is a key message of this webinar, is regulatory policy. It's easier for you, maybe at local, at national, and maybe at regional for many of your countries together. How to use that? You need to clear your objective. In the short term, the regulatory initiative, your initiatives will be mostly to assure that businesses have cash flow, and this cash flow permits to conserve jobs. Basically, that will be, as a government perspective, that will be the key role in the short term. That means during the crisis and just afterwards, is just to keep as many jobs possible. Jobs will be consumers. Consumers will be the engine of growth in the future. So this will be the key element. It will also be important. If they don't do that, they will need to help the most unequal effects, the most unfair effects of the crisis, which will be to hit the hardest, the more fragile part of your population, the old, the too young, etc. So again, that will be easy in the regulatory sense, but it needs to be done. The second thing, and I repeat, it will be a response that needs to vary, and vary according to the level of government. Again, there is what I have seen, what I have read. At the end of the day, many of the short-term responses need to be very localized. That means at municipal level, neighbor, that means they will be better at understanding lockdowns or not the lockdowns, some incentives here or not. And again, it will be related to what kind of solutions you can bring to preserve jobs and to fight inequalities. Importantly, what in the short term, and again in the sense of good governance, you will need to good governance, you need to inform, you need to bring information and to be transparent. If you are not, you will lose confidence, you will lose trust, which means basically all the rest of your instruments will be in jeopardy, will not work. The second thing is, of course, cooperation. And again, cooperation at local level. It is really, the situation is so fast evolving that the possibility to learn from each other will be huge. And so you need to have a series of instruments where you can know what others are doing, what others are trying, what has worked, what has not worked. And I think this is, again, something in the short term you can do. For instance, I like very much the website set up by Mexico, Federalismo en COVID, where every state, including some municipalities, can put what they are doing. And it's well done, and it is really, of course, this initiative needs to be built on trust and on good information and not propaganda. Because if some municipalities try to hide facts or tinker with facts, of course, there will not be information sharing, and there will be no learning collectively in face of this very, very special situation. Other important things that we can learn from the beginning of the crisis. Definitely the beginning of the crisis will be to contain the sanitary crisis, which means basically promoting physical distancing, policing lockdowns. This will be essential and it will be part of your regulatory day-to-day work, trying to put together all that. It's not easy, especially if you put lockdowns. It's easier to put them than to take them off. So again, it depends how you regulate them, how you enforce them, how you ensure that they are working or not. When to put a lockdown. If you do it too early, people will get tired. People will need to go back to work. Again, there are some already lessons about policing these lockdowns, as well as other things. As well, there has been a lot of regulatory changes in terms of ensuring adequate supply of protection equipment, hospital capacity. And if you don't get those, you will not have recovery. Again, there will not be consumer confidence as long as there is this danger, this harm, this probability of death and sickness. So it is necessary, and your regulatory improvements will need to work that way. Your work with the businesses will need to work around that supporting and addressing the health emergency among the businesses, among the sectors, etc. We are already starting to see that some of the tools and the timing can be adjusted. For instance, there is a cost-benefit analysis of asking mandatory masks versus lockdown. So there is a very interesting study that you can really do a lot, especially when you have a big informal sector, through masks instead of too strict lockdowns. Or you can use lockdowns much more progressively rather than just for the whole country, like Filipino has learned, that if they put a lockdown on thousands and thousands of islands, what will happen is probably some of the people in the islands were not as well as risk as living in a town and will find it too harmful. You will also need to understand that there will be winners and losers and zombies. Zombies, businesses that you really don't know if they're dead or alive, and you don't know if you should keep them alive, you should help them to get alive, or you should just try to help them to die off and reborn. So again, the timing and the type of intervention, your regulatory intervention, will be around those type of questions you will need to deal day by day. Some of these actions you probably know will be basically suspending regulations. That means some regulations will not be applicable anymore. There are many. We'll see later in India, for instance, many of the labor regulations have been basically suspended. You will have inspection visits suspended, very importantly. There will be authorization renewals or changes of the period. For instance, in many countries, I have seen, or at least in many, all the deadlines associated with authorization, in particular construction licenses, have been frozen. That means if all the procedures are kept alive without any loss of time. But it will be, and this is something that can be done very quickly, but you need to do it consistently and well, and you sometimes suspending one regulation without suspending the other can be very harmful. I read a case like it was in I think in Malaysia, where they made a major lockdown in many of the cities by the sea, and so a lot of fishermen were blocked. And when they unlocked the community, they realized that they were now in a calendar where they could not fish. They were on a limited fishing period, and so this created a lot of uncertainty for these fishermen. They were not in lockdown, but they could not fish anymore because it was a quota system by time. Again, tricky. You need to realize that all this requires evidence-based, a lot of consultation, a lot of information, and a lot of trust between government and businesses and consumers as well as citizens. You will have the informal sector, most of you. This is something that goes beyond pandemic, was here, will be here, and will be here. And we already know that it is not easy. Certainly there will be the promise that it will be probably a sector that you cannot deal easily. You cannot say to a person, don't go to work, just keep 5 weeks in your house and we'll pay you some $100 to $200 a week. It's not possible. They need to work, actually they are not even informal, they are probably even outside the statistics of the government. So you cannot do, there will be some rules, some interventions that are beyond you. So this is very hard. And probably these people are already very fragile. They might be hit sanitary a lot, and they can also be a danger in India. Many of the very informal labor was working from the south, and when they start to block out the north, they wanted to go back to the south, and going to the south, they brought with them the pandemic. So it is hard to try to manage COVID on this informal sector. And as well, you cannot block the formal sector and leaving the informal sector totally free, because again, there will be a competition issue. On the other hand, the informal sector will be a very, very, very proactive sector, and it will be the one who will grow up rapidly. So again, a lot of details need to be discussed, how you can help this informal sector to recover and to maybe formalize as soon as possible. And we will be talking a little bit about this at the end of my presentation. Flexibility and agility to deal with this formal sector will be essential at local level. Again, it's very, very, and usually what you will see is that some of these sectors are much more robust than you sometimes believe. But again, it's a big topic that I'm not going to go further, because it's really much more than what we can do at this point. And probably they are beyond the key regulatory instrument, as well as the tax or as well as the spending, unfortunately. Recovering. Well, here you have a little bit more time. Your sanitary crisis is over. Hopefully, you have managed, your society believes in you, believes that it was good for them to be locked out, or what can you do? What do you do? Well, you cannot go back and say, let's put the clocks to January 2020 and start over again. No, some regulations probably have been changed, and it will be sometimes hard to put them back. It will be useless to put them back. Some you will realize actually that some of the regulations were outdated and nothing happened if they didn't apply. And some of the regulations will be hitting even more when you restart than others, and you cannot enforce them more. So the rule of thumb is probably you will need to check some of the hardest hit sectors. That means most of the sectors like hospitality, tourism, transport, sport, and entertainment, where distancing is essential. So probably it will be important to talk to them and see exactly which are the regulations that are hurting them most at a certain moment, and maybe you can discuss some periods of leniency or control on inspections, for instance. There is but again, all this will need to be localized. There will be significant variations between some countries and some companies. You cannot act the same for big companies, multinational companies, than for small, medium, and if you can even informal, but it will be mostly your intervention will be more on small and medium. And of course, you might also start to think at this point about the financial sector. Locally, this financial sector is in a better shape in many countries after the terrible 2008-2009 crisis, but certainly they will be hit in the middle term because of the bankruptcy, because of the changes of demand. So again, think about how the financial sector regulations will need to be treated in a way or not. One area that I think can be done, and something and a lot actually, is red tape. Red tape, remember, is basically all the license, authorization, permits, clearances that governments ask before there are ex ante, before an activity is done, before an activity is engaged, but before a business opens. Well, again, as a rule of thumb, you should try to get as lower red tape and ex ante evaluation as before. Why? Because first, red tape is very costly for small companies. The cost of passing an authorization, getting a license, usually that time and cost cannot be put in your product, in your services, and you cannot pass it to the consumers. So it's full loss. It's a fixed cost for businesses. The red tape is a fixed cost. It's not a variable cost. And there is a lot of risk. You never know if suddenly you will be authorized or not, or when, and that it has a big impact on small entrepreneurs. And most of all, you probably will realize that most of these ex ante formalities, all these ex ante licenses, they were trying to control risks that actually are very, very, very small compared to the risk of catching COVID. Again, you need to put again on perspective, realize that many developed countries in the United States, France, Germany, when they developed their economy, when they developed their industry, their sectors, they didn't face so much formalities, so much licenses and permits and authorizations and etc. So again, if you have time, if you have political will, this is a key place to start, to try to review your ex ante, a priori formalities, license, and try to either minimize them, diminish them, or eliminate them. In the long term, you need to understand that there will be a new world internationally. Things will change, as we saw. Trade will change, IFD will change, financial exchanges will change, and this will bring destruction. But every destruction has a creativity. Something will come, and there will be an opportunity to move faster, deeper, new place. Some of the entrepreneurs will be even willing to take more risks. Some governments, some of your friends in other countries will be willing to take more risks than you. So again, it's not a race to the bottom, but certainly people will need to do something to face these consequences of economic consequences of a pandemic. So there will be also an opportunity for environmental transition. People think that there is another big looming crisis in the horizon, which is climate change. So again, better to take this crisis and try to put your house in order, or try to put it as much in order to get ready for the next big transition part. The past was maybe not as good as a predictor for the future. So again, this is an opportunity for doing regulatory reform and trying to adjust your business environment, your business climate to a very, very fast changing situation. It will certainly have an impact on the business sector and how the public resources are managed, and certainly regulatory reform can also mean relief in terms of enforcing. Maybe the government, if it reduces the number of regulators, might be a big incentive to have better regulators and less numerous regulators. It will probably mean that there are ways to achieve the same goals the government wants through other means, that setting up a new division, a new agency, a new ministry. So again, there will be hard questions to take, how your governments try to manage some of the objectives they want to achieve. So let's see that this is a reality check. You need to take it as it should show you where some of the intervention didn't work. Like India, probably they realized that their labor regulations were not really working at all. And so the pandemic was an opportunity to get rid of this. I think the last time I read it was about 10 laws at federal level and more than 100 laws, labor laws at local level, just making the labor system to be more flexible, more attuned to the situation, and to appraise the risks. Some regulators were controlling the risks that were not there or were so small that they could have survived without being there. Again, this is an opportunity to do that. There will be regulatory innovation not only at national level, innovation at local level. I have seen this, for instance, how some restaurants now are regulators in Paris or in London, how, for instance, they are letting spread somewhere else, etc. There will be also mutual recognition between countries. We saw that with the sharing of protection equipment. There will be regulatory alignments to try to understand better and to understand better the risk and manage better the regulations. All these will require leadership, because you will need to work in coordination with local level, coordination with higher level. You will need to cooperate between public and private to build trust. The crisis will be such that you will need to safeguard this rule of law, and that the only way is through cooperation. Otherwise, the rule of law will break. I don't know why I'm blocked. Yeah. The last three fundamental changes before we go to the next part. Certainly, the crisis will require government. I think there is no way that this will be a deregulation, laissez-faire situation. On the contrary, you will need, as I said just now, leadership. So, but this leadership will need to be a learned one, evidence-based. There will be hard choices to make about relaxing the standards. On one hand, you want your firms to go back to work, and on the other hand, maybe it's an opportunity to put environmental standards to prepare for the next big wave. So it's going to be hard to do this cost-benefit analysis. What should be just dumped and what should be rather maintained or even put more stringent. There will be also the danger that some government will love to be in this command and control situation, and they will continue to choose champions to say, this is the champion for my country, and this is the other one for my country, and they will get special grants, and they will have special regulatory privileges, etc. It is, in some cases, for instance, furloughs or other type of schemes of tax holidays, etc. There will be a lot of lobbies to keep that, and that will be distorted. People, some of the businesses who will cry and be more serious, more vocal, will probably get more time to pay taxes, and maybe there are not less hit. Again, very hard choices there, how to manage that. There will be competition issues because, as I said, the pandemic will hit in a very different way some sectors, some regions, some businesses, some population, some professions. And of course, that means there will be competition between all this. And should or should you not intervene? Should you let or not let the things to run? It is harder, and for ICP countries, already know that some rich countries will do whatever it takes to recover their support, and they will below their debt, and they will continue to pour money into their economic and consumer population. So this will be, in a way, quite unfair. They will probably try to do efforts to repatriate their value chains. That means they will try to reduce the chains and avoid having too much trade. There will probably also be some protectionist instincts growing up again. So it's going to be tough. These are some of the hard challenges that everybody needs to start thinking about. Let me stop here and maybe quick poll. Diego, I leave it to you. Diego? No.
Yes, thank you, Cesar, and thank you for the participants for sending your questions. We encourage you to do it in now or throughout what's remaining of this session. So very interesting presentation. You have mentioned some key terms and key options. For example, the need for evidence-based reforms is key to actually design the right approaches. Interesting example, by the way, about the fishermen. There are different measures to be tackled, and actually, if as you can see, the topic of investment climate is huge, and we need to actually focus or prioritize. You mentioned to make hard choices. Also interesting the fact that you point out that there are different types of measures according to the moment where you are in the pandemic. So one first question is about that. What type of functional areas of the business environment should be tackled? We've seen that it is as important to facilitate the creation of new businesses, the opening of new businesses, but in cases like this, it's also very important to close them, as you mentioned. So any particular advice on what to prioritize or where to start?
Well, again, I think every situation is. The rule of thumb is that some sectors will be hard hit and some sectors will have more jobs. This is perhaps a priority. But again, it is strange. For instance, I have read that for instance, in Kazakhstan, the thing that hurt the most the consumer confidence was the locking of some restaurants, some particular restaurants. And again, at the end, you want jobs, but you want the consumers to buy something for people to do. And so again, you need to test it. It's again at local level that sometimes you see the better and you understand better this relationship between the sanitary crisis, the consumer effect. You see it between Sweden and Denmark. One didn't really lock out, and the other one, yes. And strangely, it was the one who locked out, who perhaps was able to create this consumer belief or this consumer trust more than the others, despite that the restaurants were kept open in Sweden. So again, it's very local. I see another question about vouchers from my friend Tom Paris. Vouchers is, again, it works locally and it works well for a while. The problem with vouchers is, again, it's like any medicine, it's good for a moment. But if you create too much vouchers means basically a special kind of coupon that you say, well, this is a coupon for all the city of Lagos to use in Lagos restaurants. And it is a way to for instance, to start up again restaurants in Lagos. It is a good solution, but in the long term, you can create discrimination. why they can use it only in Lagos. It can even create fragmentation in your market. You will have a Lagos market and the rest of the Nigeria market. So again, some of these tools need to be assessed. There are good ways, and I know about coupons that have been tried in different places, in China in particular. But again, there need to be reassessed and reevaluated as you go. And again, better to try to use more systematic across the board actions than to try to find too much sectoralized regulations. Maybe it is what I would react right now to those two questions. I see the poll, and I see that 80% of the people that indicate that they have already started to think about that, and I'm really happy, because actually it is what I want to talk now about.
So yes, for the sake of timing, we have 30 more minutes for to finalize the session. So please go ahead with the presentation. We will wrap up.
I will do my best to keep track of time. Let's see if I am back. Well, luckily, governments, OECD governments, but developing countries are not new to use the regulatory tool as a policy instrument for improving business environment. There are countries like Mexico, Korea, or even some countries of the ex-Soviet Union who have realized that regulation is a key tool to improve the business environment after a big shock, a big economic shock, like in Mexico, the devaluation, like in Korea, a big economic crisis, like in the ex-Soviet Union, a change of economic regime, economic regulatory framework. And so there are some practices that can help, that have helped some of the countries that said that there is already some thinking about the future, what to do after the sanitary crisis. Well, there are a couple of things to know. First, it is often better, like sometimes do it like in medicine, better to do it generally and hurtful at the beginning than to do it bit by bit, item by item. It is called systematic approach to regulation. It is often hurtful, but it is often more effective to do a regulatory reform systematically. It avoids finding champions, it avoids finding here and there. The second thing I believe, and it is a little bit different and not contradictory, but different to what I said, that if you start a regulatory program, you need to realize that the red tape is important. The red tape, the administrative cost, should have been dealt at the beginning, but at a certain moment, you should think beyond simplification. You really need to go to the laws and regulation, not of the symptoms, to the disease, the malaise, the malady, I forgot the name. The sickness. You need to go to the sickness and not stay. Usually, simplification, they just try to improve the ways regulations are enforced or complied to. Sometimes you need to go to the regulation rather than only simplification. There's no really big benefit to digitalize a bad regulation, to digitalize a license that was not needed. So again, I think these are the two things, very important. The third thing is that I think you need to understand that you should do regulatory reform at least 3 levels. You need to do policies, approach, and strategies. You can see in the chart. Then you need to have institutions, champions, organizations that can really deliver. Regulatory reform needs to be delivered. It's not something that you do just changing a law. You need to implement it, you need to fine tune it, you need to most probably develop it and move step by step. And then you have tools. And certainly there is many tools. Now the famous toolkit to improve the regulatory environment for businesses has grown enormously in the past 10 years. So again, I think it is better, the best practice is systematic, to go to regulations rather just to simplify them, and to try to understand and to have an institution, to have somebody, like people said in their poll, they have to really take charge of trying to drive the regulatory reform. Another important thing I have seen and people have realized, that you need two types of champions. One, and I will start with the technical unit. You need somebody to procure. You need a prosecutor. You need a technician who really knows to fight for the best benefit at a lower cost. It's a technical unit. It's an expert meeting. It's an expert group. It's a task force, and they need to do it as much based on evidence. However, I have found that it is not enough. You will need somebody, like in a jury, you will need to have a judge to articulate, to mitigate, to see and to balance the reality with the best practice. And I think you need to work also at a policymaker level. So in terms of institutions, I think you need to have that. A prosecutor on one hand, the task force, and a policymaker, which is the champion who will need to take the tough decisions, to basically to enforce ministerial action. Around this, you will need to have, of course, interministerial coordination, and again, a series of procedures, processes, and mechanisms. But again, you need to have a prosecutor, somebody expert trying to move fast and to really move the frontier if you want to have an impact in terms of regulatory reform. Other very important things that you will need to drive a systematic regulatory review. You will need, of course, transparency and benchmarking. Transparency, because nobody will like to be treated differently than others, and they want to see why this ministry has been deregulated or reformed and not the others. Benchmarking, because at the end of the day, it is the environment, the business environment will touch more than 2 or 3 ministries. And of course, it's important that everybody will try to develop some virtuous circle of improvement among your administration. Cooperation will be also very important, in particular for ACP countries. I think one element that the crisis will show is that even if the action is, the mitigation action will be at local level, the regulatory frameworks will gain to be at a higher level than at national level. There will be more need, I guess, for technical regulations. There will be less need for really ex-ante tools. And for technical regulation, because they're technical, they're costly to develop, they're more complex, and they can be easily captured by local champions, they better be done at regional level, like the different regional intergovernmental organizations that today exist. I think this has been a very important tool, for instance, for Central Asia at this moment. Then you can use some processes reviews. There is one that we do is the regulatory guillotine. For some who wants, I can explain that. Basically, the regulatory guillotine is you change the burden of the proof. Basically, it is a white slate approach where you say every regulation will be eliminated unless they are proved otherwise. This is a guillotine. That means you will say in 6 months all regulation will be repealed unless the regulators can prove that they are useful. And they are useful now after COVID. That is a regulatory guillotine. It is tricky, it is complex, but it can. On the other hand, you can have more easy, more political solutions like the one I pick up from Idaho, the state of the United States, which is quite rural. It's not one of the most industrialized one, but it's very interesting what they did. They call it the Fresh Start Initiative, and they had 5 steps. First, they suspended and modified many rules during the pandemic. And they said that any rule suspended or modified should remain off the book. That means they will be off the book until they are allowed to come back to the book expressly. Then the Congress, the state Congress, set up bipartisan independent commissions to study these rules. The commission identified, they had a special body, they have a technical unit who analyze each one of the suspended regulations. The commission then recommended for each one of them if they can or cannot and when they can be re-implemented, and a sunsetting, automatically elimination of those that could not be done. And everything was done in a single package. They didn't want to go one by one. At the end of the day, all recommendations were presented to Congress, and to the executive, and they were basically said to be eliminated unless there was an affirmative, explicit action by the ministry to say, no, this one, no, but they needed to justify it. It is being done. It is a process. Has been quite well received so far. We will see if it works, but I think this was already a very good way to try to put solutions in a political framework, in a timing framework, and in an action-oriented framework. Tools. That was the institutions and processes. I want to talk to you about basically 2 important tools. One will be the quick start. And here I want to underline the possibility to have a very quick startup for very small firms. This is a Mexican case. I won't have time to explain, but for this Mexican case, if you are part of one of the 200 activities that were considered low risk, you can register and get a certificate following a green channel. And then you are basically inspected 6 months afterwards. For those who are not part of those 200 something list of risky activities, they need to process the other way. But of course, what happened with this green list, they were able to deal with a lot of informal activities. Most of the informal activities were part of these low risk, no risk activities. Very important to start up many of these very small firms that you cannot block, but you could actually formalize. The other thing that I have seen is that you should not forget, and again, the Doing Business study has been doing a lot of work on this, is the way to exit. There will be a lot of exit during this crisis. And the worst case scenario is that you have zombie firms, and they are using resources, capital in particular, but also human capital that should be rather moving to new sectors. So why have so much money, time, expert, university graduates working in areas like maybe tourism that will not pick up for the next 18 months? So again, you need to have very easy ways to avoid this waste of capital and resources. And to do that, you need good insolvency procedures with safeguards, with possibility to check abuses. Conclusions, I think for ACP countries, the tax and spend policy option will be quite limited. So they will need to do a lot of regulatory reform to improve their climate environment, or to help the climate the business climate to recover. So there will be not only a way to help, but to change your climate environment, the business climate environment, towards risk regulation, technical regulation instead of blank regulations, or instead of just licenses and permits. It will be also important to think about the rulemaking in the future to understand better the costs and benefits of your future laws. And here already, you know that there is a good part of work about how to do RIA, regulatory impact assessment. And again, I think as any crisis, you will see that there is innovation, there is ways that you can use nudge, you can use behavioral situations to solve very, very complex situations without going to the old-fashioned command and control. All this said, you should not take this webinar as the only solution is regulatory reform. There will be other work. You will need to work on public governance. You will need to continue work on ethics and on transparency. You will probably use other tools like ex post evaluation. Anyway, and this is my last two sentences, the regulatory actions they will take will not only save probably the rule of law, but will mark the rule of law for the next 10 years. This has happened in many countries I have worked after a big economic crisis. It is the way the scares recover, that the tissue recovers, that marks the next generation. And of course, there will be risk ahead. And of course, saving this pandemic will make you stronger and faster for growth. I think I have finished, Diego. This is another little question. Has your government set up a task force to mitigate the economic consequences? It's a little bit similar, but here really we are asking about a specific prosecutor for reform.
Thank you, Cesar. So while the audience respond to that quick question, let's move to some of the questions that have been posed actually throughout this whole day, because we had this webinar in English now and the webinar in French this morning. So reflecting on the questions sent by the audience, never miss a good crisis. Right now, it is being discussed about the concept of building back better, and you have mentioned it. You mentioned to take this opportunity to accelerate environmental transition, also start better from a social perspective, for a more inclusive business environment, as well as being more ambitious in the regulatory reforms that countries need. Do you have anything to say in that respect on that momentum to touch on those areas that are often forgotten, or those more ambitious agendas that it could be a good opportunity right now?
Well, again, it's very, very, very complex to manage the scope, the speed of a systematic reform as one way to make more resilient the business environment. But certainly, what I have seen is that there are virtuous circles. There is some tendency that a success is the mother of a success, and certainly that if a government achieves some regulatory relief in one area, like labor law, it will give credibility to go further. It will build alliances. It will create allies for further reform. And it is how I have seen some countries move faster, sadly, in their structural reforms is through 2 or 3 reforms well done, often on the formalities of the area, on the red tape, that has permitted them to go deeper and to move towards more sustainable regulations, more participative regulations, more gender neutral regulations. So again, it is something that the COVID pandemic has shown, is that a lot of is behavioral, and people are willing to comply when they see a common goal, when they understand and then when they trust the government about the risks. So I think it is an opportunity for government to show that they can build trust and they can be participative, they can delegate to the local level, and they can experiment at local level too. And again, I think this is a way to probably go faster and develop a more sustainable, durable, robust business climate.
Thank you. So reflecting on another question, you mentioned the systematic review of regulations as one of these responses, and even as one of those potential stronger steps that could be taken at this point. You mentioned the guillotine. Given that the crisis is hitting stronger some sectors, could it be considered to, also because thinking about the urgency to act, could it be thought that a guillotine is undertaken first starting with those sectors that are more affected and then progressively expanded?
I certainly do. Of course, guillotine probably has bigger impact if it's more systematic. It's just because it permits again to try to develop this behavior toward improvement, and actually this effort for making regulators accountable of their regulations. They need to justify why they want to keep a regulation in light of the economic crisis. So it makes them that way. But certainly I understand that there are some areas that probably require more reform, faster reform, or they are more than willing to review their regulatory regimes. I have seen regulatory guillotines trying to focus on, for instance, developing better and more developed, more secure, more inclusive special zones, investment zones. So trying to go and pick up all the rules, regulations, the red tape and not red tape involving all these economic zones, franc zones, labor zones, etc., and to put them into a code. And of course, this has probably make a success, and then they can move to the next success. So sometimes it's that. It is finding 2 or 3 important successes. Now, if you have a too narrow guillotine, maybe you should not do a guillotine. You should better do item by item approach, a deregulation approach. But again, the important thing of the guillotine is that it forces the regulator to justify why they need to keep their regulation in face of the post-COVID situation.
Another question from our audience is about the role of the private sector. We have mentioned the importance of PPD. The private sector can play, what is the role that the private sector can play to help build the trust needed and in providing support to these evidence-based regulatory reforms?
Definitely. I didn't go too much into the means of bringing together the private sector. But when I was thinking about transparency, benchmarking, cooperation, I think it's a public and private issue. If you want to have strong rule of laws to build up your economy, you need to play fair, to play fair with the business sector, to the private sector. And to do that, you need to help them to understand the issues, help them to understand the choices, some better than others, some more complex than others, some more costly than others. And of course, this is one way to go further. And actually, some of the most important regulatory reforms, systematic economic reforms I have seen, have been built with cooperation. For instance, we were talking about the regulatory guillotine in Vietnam, or the regulatory guillotine in Mexico, or even in Serbia, were ways to bring in the business sector and to not only complain about the regulation, but propose solutions. So certainly it is an opportunity to hear the business sector, to give their advice, and probably understand how they see the risks. At the end of the day, a regulation is just a way, a mechanism that the state set up to avoid some risk for the environment, risk for the labor, risk for the consumer, risk of a market failure. So it is important that the business sector try to articulate the risk, if it's there, and if there is no other way than a regulation to face that risk and to solve it, and maybe to mitigate it. So no, definitely, when I spoke about transparency, I spoke concretely, it was consultation that you can build that.
All right, Cesar, we have 5 more minutes just to conclude. And if we move to the next slide, please. After this interesting presentation, which, as you can see, the topic is pretty large, and each case is different. We have mentioned that the moment where you are in the crisis determines also the type of actions to be undertaken. And so for us, for the ICR facility and for our donors, we see the importance of investment climate reform to help mitigate the devastating effects of the crisis in ACP countries. And as I mentioned, this webinar is part of our overall COVID response, and we would like to offer a more detailed or personalized support to some of the attendants from ACP countries that have been here in this virtual presentation. So in order to tackle those challenges, to dig further into your specific issues, your specific challenges, and your specific situation, we are offering these one-on-one sessions, these one-on-one clinics, and you can actually apply from an ACP country, Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, any of the 79 countries composing this group of states. You can apply to have an individual session with our intervenant today, with Cesar Cordova, to dig further into this. So we would be glad to receive your request. Please send us an email to the address that is there on your screen, icrfacility@giz.de. Of course, we cannot guarantee a space for all of you. We will have to respect some eligibility criteria, but of course we are welcoming your messages and your requests. Also, some of the questions that could not be answered because of the sake of time could be also solved through those one-on-one clinics. And as we have seen through the presentation, yeah, there is opportunities, there are concrete actions that can be taken, and if these one-on-one clinics can help you move forward into that direction, we would be very happy to provide that kind of support. So please send us an email with that request, as well as your organization, and the questions you would like to be discussed. Just also, I'd like to mention that this presentation, as well as the recording of this session, will be available. I think the presentation is right now downloadable in your GoToWebinar screen, and soon you will have also access to the video so that you can share it with your colleagues. So just to conclude about this possibility to have these one-on-one sessions.